Hello again, Hunter here at Fossil Creek Nursery. Today I am going to give a little presentation on harvesting your veggies. So sometimes it is hard to know the exact time to harvest. So in this video we'll just go over a few things to look for, a couple of ideas about harvesting, proper time, and also how to harvest your seeds. So counting the days to maturity cannot always be the best way to determine the time to harvest your fruit, and that's because precipitation, temperature, and the soil fertility change year by year. However, though, keeping track of those days will help you get an idea of the time that you should be looking to harvest. So it'll give you kind of an estimated time. It is very important to choose the best picking time for your vegetables because it will affect quality, the nutritional value, and the flavor. Harvesting vegetables is just as important as growing them. The best way to harvest them also is to use hand pruners, and this is to make sure that you're not damaging the plant itself when you are picking your fruit or veggies. So we'll get into a little bit more specific. Most fruiting and leafing vegetables are not grown until full maturity. The picking time is a balance between allowing time for the fruit to grow in size versus the the type of flavor, and also the nutritional value, as I said before. So things like cob and pod vegetables, which would be beans, corn, things of that nature, they're harvested earlier because their sugars will eventually turn to starch. Sweet corn will lose its quality after only a few days of a delayed harvest. So knowing the proper time to pick these veggies specifically is extremely important, and you can see how this issues would arise in larger scale operations if a harvest was delayed because of a machine breakdown or any other kind of problems that they would have on the actual farm. So summer squash, so like your zucchini, your delicata, your regular yellow squash, are picked when they're younger and their skins are tender. This is because if you pick them later, their skin gets really tough. So when you're cooking them, it's harder to get that skin to be edible, and in turn, the fleshy inside, is going to not taste as well. Winter squash, on the other hand, should be picked when the skin is tough. So we're talking about like pumpkins and gourds and more kind of ornamental squash also. So the skin should be tough enough that if you're using your thumbnail, it will resist pressure. It doesn't need to be like hard as a rock, for example, but you want to have that firm skin. So tomatoes, unless you want to have fried green tomatoes, which are great, I love them too, you should let the tomatoes vine ripen. You're going to look for that shift from a green to a red color. Usually when you start seeing the shifted color, you want to harvest about 2 to 3 days after that to let it really ripen up and get those sweet sugars really going in that. If frost is threatening, so later in the season, you can totally pick fruit if it's still green. Just look for ones that are maybe more mature green, which is going to be like 3/4 of the normal size, and it will actually have a glossy texture to it. And those can just be ripened indoors for later in the season. Peppers, picking peppers when they're green is the best, and this is because it encourages more production of peppers throughout the season. So if you're waiting for them to be red, you should pick all but one of them or two of them because this is going to keep kind of that cycle of fruiting going. In my experiences, I've seen that or tend to see that red peppers are spicy. Maybe it's because more seeds. It's still kind of up for debate, but in my own experience, I've kind of found that. So going into leafy salad greens. So salad greens can pretty much be harvested whenever. We're talking about like microgreens to baby spinach to full-size spring salad mix or arugula, things like that. The larger the leaf or the leafy green, the more bitter it will be. And these leafy vegetables that I'm talking about are going to be kind of like cold season crops. Beets, cabbage, celery, green onions, lettuce, spinach, turnip greens, all of that nature. And also, there's still time to plant some cool season crops because they'll be ready in 30 days. So we still got tons of time. And now that it's going to start cooling down, hopefully we'll be able to grow those lettuce heads without them bolting and becoming really bitter. Moving on to root veggies. So potatoes and young beets are harvested early. That's going to be like a sweet potato is going to have less starch in it. So harvesting it early is going to be the best tasting potato. Young beets also have a higher sugar content. So they're harvested early before those turn to starch. The carrots, beets, and turnips a little different. You just want to grow them until they can grow in size until basically you don't want them to be woody. So we're talking about late in the season harvesting, even into November. Which brings me into this. Planting done at the opportune time will allow you to harvest root vegetables up until December. And this is mainly due because they can take the cold, but also you want to mulch with that. So the mulch is going to keep a more constant temperature in your soil, and in turn, you're going to have a crop later into the season. And then finally, parsnips, something you typically will eat at Thanksgiving, they're going to be harvested after first frost, and that's the best time to harvest them for the best quality. A little bit about fruit trees. So fruit trees, they kind of depend on the type. The time of harvest varies greatly from different varieties. For example, a Honeycrisp apple, you harvest middle to late September, and then something like a Red Delicious is going to be harvested mid-October or even later. The bloom times on these also vary, so it's hard to keep track of, but we do have an excellent worksheet here at Fossil Creek that gives you a list of we got apples, peaches, plums, cherries, apricots, lots of different fruit trees, and the sheet will basically tell you when the bloom time is and also when to expect to harvest. All right, so the last little bit is going to be about collecting seeds. So seeds are often extracted after the fruit is ripe, but before rotting. So this would be like tomatoes or peppers. So they're going to be an overripe, almost to the point where they're kind of squishy, for lack of better terms. That's the best time to harvest them. So, but then when you harvest them, you're going to want to pull those seeds, and tomato seeds can be really, really tiny also. But you want to get those seeds and separate from the pulp and then dry them out. Same with peppers. Peppers are a little bit easier. For summer squash and cucumbers, you want to just leave those on the vine until after first frost. They will eventually, that's when the most seeds will come out. The cucumber, instead of having all that flesh, is going to be full of seeds. Same with the summer squash. Winter squash and pumpkins, similar. They're just going to be harvested a little bit later. Same as tomatoes, separate from the pulp and let them dry. And finally, pod crops. So we're talking about beans and peas, other legumes such as that. They're going to leave on the vine, until they're dry. And you want to harvest them before the seed is dispersed. So kind of a fine line, but that's what you want to be looking for. Yeah, so that's kind of all I have about harvesting and harvesting seeds. So take a couple questions here before the end. So the question is, can onions be planted and harvested and be ready by December? If you plant them this late, I don't think you're going to have enough time to them developed into a full onion. But if you plant them early in the season, and then in the middle of the season, you'll have them by December. And the other question, is it too late to plant Rose of Sharon? Definitely not. You have plenty of time, and the Rose of Sharon are also blooming right now, so perfect time to come and get some. Cool. I think that's the only question, unless anybody's got something else.